Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode number 86 of Speed Tips by Bob and Chad. I want to welcome everybody in here to listen to us tonight. We've got a lot of things we're going to talk about. And of course, we got the Super Nationals coming up. So we definitely will be talking about that a little bit. That's going to be exciting. It's a little over a week away before the Prelude starts. And then when the Prelude starts, we'll have 8 days of racing at Boone Speedway in Boone, Iowa. So the IMCA Super Nationals is always a stellar event. Um, it's it's one of those deals. Like I tell people, I can't explain to you much about it. You gotta see it. You got, if you've not been to the IMCA Super Nationals, it's a bucket list thing you've got to do because the way they do that show and how they run that racetrack, they run, it'll be with the prelude now, or prelude now, it's going to be 8 days of racing on that track. So they do an amazing job keeping that thing intact, and it's definitely the luck of the draw. The heat races are very important, and of course, depending on which heat race you're in, sometimes the track conditions are a little different because it does fade. They work it every 10 races, and so of course the first race is a little greasy, the last race is a little slick, and so in between there's kind of where you want to be. So what's new and exciting at Wehrs Machine?
Same thing. We're in massive Super Nationals prep for the big weeks, so we're busy working on the trailer, and I know the marketing team's working on all the releases for all the new products. I think they told me today we got six new products that will be releasing to the world there at Super Nationals. So it's kind of been our trade show. We don't go to the PRI show anymore. We do just the large trackside events and try to put our focus on getting in front of the people at the racetrack. And obviously, the Super Nationals with 1,000 race cars is one of the largest short track race in America. So, what an awesome place! Looks like it's going to be a great week again. So we're excited. We're loading up and looking forward to being there.
Yep, it's going to be, the weather looks like it's going to be a little bit on the warm side, but anything is better than rain. So I really don't care if I have to wear a sweatshirt. I can't get much less than a t-shirt, or I'd scare too many people. So, but no, I'm looking forward to it. I had a guy, one of our listeners, email me today. He had a situation. He was talking about his car runs really good for about 8 laps, and it tends to go away where the shock seems to fade, and if they have a restart, the car just goes away. And talking about different things, and he kind of talked about how the right rear tire temperature is about 3 times hotter than the left rear tire temperature, and it's definitely hotter on the inside than it is, of course, on the outside. And so I kind of gave him a little bit of diagnosis, but I kind of wanted to highlight that because, of course, for me to email somebody back with 1,000 words, I kind of got to give them the short version. But my first thing when I looked at that deal, and let me know what you think too, Chad. Of course, got to make sure you got a turn down on the header. You don't want hot air blowing back on that right rear shock or that right rear tire. That's definitely for sure. The other thing, though, that I thought sounded most suspicious when he talked about how the temperature was substantially warmer on the inside of the tire than the outside tire, that led me to believe that that's kind of a brake situation. And I actually even questioned the fact if maybe the left rear caliper is not working as well and the right rear caliper is overworking, running so hot that that's creating that tire to get that much hotter. Because, I mean, you'd have to really spin that tire a lot and really run it low on air pressure And I just don't know if 8 laps would get it to the point where it's 3 times the heat that it would have if there wasn't some other deal where, if that right rear caliper is the only one doing the work. That's a lot of temperature, being poured on the inside of that tire. And of course, I'm quite sure, they're running a bead lock with a foam cover in it. So, it's definitely going to create heat and actually going to create tire heat. But like I told him too, the other thing was the fact that, the tire that's hot, it's the tire that's spinning. It's not grabbing, it's not getting the grip. So it's probably a combination of numerous things. What's your opinion on that situation?
Yeah, definitely shock, heat. There's a lot of things you can do there, but if they're, one of the things that I always did every time we came in after a run, we'd analyze everything. That not only would we measure the tire and check the air pressure, we'd also take the heat gun and take tire temps and then also take rotor temps. So that'd be a one quick way to have one of them infrared guns to shoot at the rotors. And if you have one that's 150 and one that's at 400, you got a definite something's wrong there for sure. Something's warped or hanging up, or the pads aren't releasing, or something's wrong there. So definitely, the heat is an issue for sure. Asphalt racing, you get so much more temperature, but even the dirt cars now with the aggressive brakes that we're running, we're building more heat than we've ever built before. So definitely something going on there. And I remember back in the day, when we were running our modifieds, guys even had air scoops off the deck tin going to the right rear tire and the left rear tire to cool them down, when they're running long features. And, it was kind of a monkey see, monkey do thing, whether it was doing much or not. But, they were running aggressive brakes on them. That was when we were running our USMTS style cars. So you had really aggressive brakes, and, we were building heat on long runs. So they run some air ducts like you do on asphalt cars to the tires and the brakes to cool them off. But I'm not sure how legal that would be today, but definitely something you got to look at. And like you said, turning the exhaust and making things little deflectors and whatnot. But your oil in your shock, if it's 3/4 of a season old, is going to break down quicker than the new too. So
And that's the other thing. They're by the rules, they have to run an economy shock, which I'm not saying anything bad about that, because it's just like the tire. If everybody's got to run the same thing, it's a rule. So it's just the way it goes. But if you've got other things going on, like a lot of brake heat or a lot of exhaust heat or something like that, that less expensive shock doesn't have. The only way you can build a less expensive shock is have less expensive components in it, and it's not going to take abuse or things like that, like some of the higher end quality products are. So, and like I said, and I'm not saying anything bad about the shock, but you're right. If that shock is, if it's a season old already, and then it's had heat on it for I don't know how many nights or whatever, all that stuff's going to break down, and it could cause those problems. The other thought too was, we had a situation where earlier this year we had a customer that had he bought a set of brake pads, and somehow or another, whoever boxed these pads at the factory, one pair of the pads was actually the real light pad, and one pair was a super aggressive pad. So, and he had the super aggressive pad. Luckily, his was on the left rear, but it was a situation where he could never get a good brake balance. Well, when he took them off and then actually reviewed the part number on the pad itself, lo and behold, somehow or another, something got misboxed at the factory. So there's all kinds of those little things. It's hard for a guy to actually say, but those would be things I would kind of think about. But I thought that was a good subject to start with tonight, and see what we got. Adam, Chevelle lower frame measurements. Took mine off tonight, and it measures 5 5/8 inch. Adam, I think you're probably pretty close. I'm thinking that 5 5/8 sounds about right. Um, that's just another number that, for some reason, that's not stuck in my brain today. But 5 5/8 sounds pretty good. I don't think you're in too bad a shape there. Aaron, raising or lowering the frame mount on the rear of an IMCA Sport Mod, what can you expect? Raising and lowering the frame mount. Well, you're going to have when you increase angle like on a trailing arm mount, you're going to get more roll steer. You're going to get more drive out of that corner. And so that's the two things. When you lower it, you're going to take some of the roll steer out of it. And in my opinion, and some people disagree, but in my opinion, you're going to take a little bit of drive out of it because the anti-squat factor, it changes quite a bit and moves that pickup point, or that where everything intersects, closer to the front, and might not give you the traction that you would like to have. So that's kind of what, my suggestion would be, what I would expect. Josh, BHA Sport Mod, high bank 3/8 mile racetrack, fairly fast, but a little tight getting in. Pretty base setup, rear end is square, but the front end just feels a little tight turning in. When I fight that, I feel like it tails the rear off the corner. Any ideas? Thanks again. You got an opinion on that one, Chad?
Yeah, you got a free entry then, so if you're just a little bit tight in, it sounds like you're pretty close. So maybe just softening the left front spring, or I don't know, maybe just a little bit more wedge to rotate in the corner. There's a bunch of little things you could do to make it turn just a little bit on entry, soften the right front shock. There's a couple little things that you can do there. Sounds like it's pretty close. You don't need a big change, so I wouldn't take a big swing at it.
Yeah, I would definitely. It might be something. The 25-pound softer left front spring might be all you might need just to get that car to turn in and rotate a little better. Or like Chad said, a little bit more left rear bite so that it takes a little bit of side bite out of the right rear. Because more than likely, anytime you have that feeling, the right rear is grabbing more than the right front. And so you got to just kind of free it up a little bit, take a little bit of that side bite off that right rear. Tim, what's your recommendations for spring in a US Area stock car? What spring heights used in the rear? Good place to start. It kind of depends. There's all kinds of guys trying all kinds of different stuff, but a good basic setup, 1100 left front and a 900 right front. Right rear, I'd probably be in that. I would have a 16-inch 150, maybe a 175. The 125 in that heavy a car, in my opinion, is a little iffy. I think it can make the car a little bit inconsistent. I just think you need more spring in those cars because we don't have, we don't have the trailing arm angle as much as like a modified would have to keep the car up without having the spring to help do it. Right rear, 2.25, 250, depending on, the driver preference. That's pretty much a basic. That's a good starting spot, and you can kind of adjust it from there. Chris, hey, Chad, option A, we've talked about the other day, helped entry. Thanks again for your input. Oh, that's awesome.
Glad we could help, Chris.
Cole, when cleaning the Torrington bearing and re-greasing them, what kind of grease are you guys using and how much is optimal?
Well, it kind of depends on what you want and what you're using. I mean, I like a thicker one to be more of a dirt barrier. Some guys are just using their same synthetic wheel bearing grease. Some guys are using the Molly spray lube from Schaefer's, and so I mean, I think any kind of lubrication on there is good, just as long as you're doing the maintenance and keeping them clean and not letting them go and get rusty, and letting the water sit in there. So always make sure that you're running the Torrington bearings on the top. I had that question come up again today. A guy was going to put them in the bottom, and I said it's got to go in the top just for cleaning purposes. And that's key, is to keeping that stuff clean so it works and the bearings work so that they're actually doing what they're intended to do.
Blake, how do you feel about a Swift 235 on a dry slick racetrack in a hobby stock?
Tight helix.
The helix spring?
I think he's got TH after it. I think he's tight helix.
Yeah, TH. I mean, that weighted car, that spring works pretty good from what I've been told. I know some of the stock car guys like running that spring, and some of the guys that are pretty fast, I've heard they're running that right rear spring. So it might not be a bad idea on a dry slick racetrack in a hobby stock. Team 77. What kind of opinion angle should an IMCA stock car have, and what's your method of measuring it? Well, the opinion angle that I'd recommend on a stock car is probably right around 7 degrees. There's the thing that you would think that it's kind of a solid type suspension, so that you wouldn't need a lot of pinion angle, but there's a lot of steer in that suspension. And when you get all that steer in there, then that rear end's moving around, creating the need for pinion angle. Where I would measure it is I would try to measure it on the yoke of the drive shaft, or on the flat side of the rear end itself. Any place that's actually a flat spot on the pinion would be where I would recommend doing it, or on the pumpkin, I mean. Team 77, I would also like to know ballpark angles on rear control arms at ride height of an IMCA stock car. You guys do a good job with this page. I can't wait to Monday to learn all the knowledge. Thank you for all you guys do. Well, we appreciate that. We have a good time with it. We look forward to it. I look forward to talking with you guys. We always enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. Keeps me thinking. That way I get these questions and I have to think now. Let's think about this. But to your actual question, if I could run 25 degrees of angle in that left lower, that would be pretty cool. You're probably only going to be able to get about 20, but 25 would be pretty good. The right rear just depends on what the racetrack condition is. I would be anywhere from 5 to 10 degrees. Slicker type racetrack, that 5 degrees. Heavier type racetrack, that 10 degrees. Ashley, good evening, guys. Can you tell me the proper heat range of the American Racer modified tire? I've been told this is hard to find information. I've been told 150 degrees. Once you get over the 150 degrees is when that tire quits or starts to fade. I know like the IMCA tire, if we can keep that in that 130 to 140 range, and that American Racer's similar heat. I think the American Racer will take a little bit more heat than what the IMCA tire is, but I would be real nervous of running anything over 150 degrees. I'd still be in that 135, 140 range if I could be. What's your opinion, Chad?
It's been a long time since I talked tire heat. I don't even know where they want you to be.
The lower Adam asked about is bent. A new one is 5 1/4. Oh, well, thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. I just didn't have that on the top of my head tonight. It was definitely a Monday today, and so I didn't have that stuck in that. That particular chip wasn't working in the brain cell here tonight. 5 1/4, 5 5/8. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that would be definitely been. Thanks for bringing that to our attention, Chris. I appreciate that. Justin, see you guys next week. Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing all you guys next week. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to, like I said, we'll have 8 days to spend and see people, and so I'm looking forward to that. Looking forward to getting to know some of the people that listen to the show and see some of our customers that we haven't, you don't only get to see once a year. And so it's always an exciting time. Like I said, the only thing about the Super Nationals that I dislike is the fact if it rains. That just the weather, Mother Nature's got to be graceful on us. I'll take 95 degrees and bitch about sweating rather than rain. Mark, I have a soft brake pedal, even though I bleed the master cylinder and caliper with a good vacuum bleeder. Can I put a check valve in it? I don't recommend check valves. And I don't know enough. I don't know enough about that check valve to really say, but I've never run them. It just doesn't seem like you need them. I would be willing to bet that you've got a master cylinder that's going bad. If you've got a soft pedal and you bled the master cylinder and bled the caliper with a good vacuum bleeder, there's air in there, or there's something's not working right in that master cylinder, and I would believe probably replacing that master cylinder would definitely probably fix your problem. Sean, Chad, on your IMCA rear two-link brackets, where do you measure to figure out what shock drop mount I need?
So all the measurements are referenced from the center line of the axle. So you would just give a center line down to where your shock mount is, and then 4, 5, 6, whatever it ends up being, that's what you'd get for the plates to go on that particular application. We don't have any forward and back adjustment on the IMCA plate. Our standard stuff, you can put different shock mounts on there to manipulate the angle, but on a sport mod with just a shock mount like that, there isn't really any gain by going up, down, left, right, all over the place. You're just trying to make sure that the shock doesn't bottom out through travel is basically what you're trying to achieve there.
Noah, IMCA Sport Mod. So tried a lighter left rear spring from a 225 to a 175. Didn't go anywhere. Lost forward traction. Whoa. There's a long question. More than likely, we probably needed to put a little more preload on it. And it's, and some guys aren't a fan of that soft spring. You really have to, the key to the soft spring is you got to put quite a bit of preload in it to get the car to hike up so that your actual traction isn't necessarily coming from the spring. It's actually coming from the trailing arm. So that trailing arm is running about 45 degrees of angle when you're on the throttle. And so more than likely, that's probably what happened there in that situation. I'm not sure, but that's what I'm guessing is probably the case. Because I know there's guys running 100-pound springs, 125-pound springs. I don't think they're as consistent. I'm more in the 150, 175-pound range. On a Wasota Midwest Modified, car loses traction coming off the corner when the track starts to slick up. Have tried 4 offs. Have tried reverse stagger, moved 25 pounds of lead, over any ideas to try? Well, what's your thoughts, Chad?
If it's that extreme, it sounds like maybe you're tight in. Maybe the car is an entry issue instead of an exit issue.
That's probably what I would lean towards too, and especially if you're putting a 4-inch offset on there, more than likely the car is so tight that it snaps. What happens is the car is actually tight getting in, like Chad just said, and then what'll happen is it'll actually snap. It goes in and it's tight, 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 and then it snaps loose, and then it's just loose all the way off the corner. So I would look at corner entry first to see if the car's not a little bit slick, not a little bit tight on the slicker type racetracks.
Entry 1, corner 1, first lap.
Yep.
Because if you have a problem on the first lap, generally if you've got enough experience and the car pushes on that first lap, you're going to do something different. You're going to drive it harder. You're going to bend it going in the corner. You're going to do things to manipulate the problem, and then you're not going to remember what the initial problem was. But not saying that that's it, but that could be part of the problem.
Yeah, that would be where I would look. Is it loses traction coming off the corner would lead me to believe that there's a good possibility, and especially if you've tried the 4-offs, and reverse stagger would really make it tight. Getting into the corner. So I would think everything you've tried, I would think would make the car snug on the corner entry, which in turn, like I said, it'll just snap loose on you to the point where it breaks traction and then it can't ever get it back. Chris says, no problem. He's been a few of those A-frames over the years. Yeah. Good question. We've studied some. While the functional travel of that spring is well above what you're seeing, the compression load and relatively coil spacing, what are you feeling more in the right rear weight increase? With the added spring mass being heavier coiled spring, its impact it will impact the shock and add more right rear load. This setup works well when the racetrack has a lot of grip, but can pose challenges as the racetrack changes and goes slick, which we often see is the dry summers. There's always a time and a place for a few different spring rates per corner, especially if you're traveling to multiple racetracks. Yeah, that's a good point, Justin. You definitely got some good points there. Appreciate your input on that. Joel wants to know, what is your preference of J-bar angle on a slick track for an A mod? I don't know about actual angle, but the split, I never go over 8 inches of split between the pinion and the frame itself. It seems like if you go over that, it starts to try to spike that right rear tire and can make the car finicky. I actually start with a 6 inches of split is where we normally start with, and then I only change it like if we start with 6 inches of split, and then when the racetrack starts to go slick, we drop it on the rear end a 1/2 inch, and very seldom ever go more than that. That's kind of our go-to. McBurney's car, that works pretty good. Tim, Cole Kelly Royal Chain Lube is the best. That's good to know. Grease just collects a lot of dust and dirt. Yep, I can't disagree with that. Steve's watching. Well, that's awesome. I'm glad you're watching, Steve. See, Sean, would you go to a 550 right front spring to a 600-pound spring to free the car up on corner entry? Um, Actually, Sean, I would probably soften the left front anymore in today's world. Um, that 600, that's just not a number we see being used an awful lot. Usually, what we do is we've got a 500 right front, and then if we need the car to turn or go in more, we'll go to a 450 or a 475 left front, and go from that. If you're going with a 550, I'd probably try to go to a 500 left front. I don't know what your left front actually is now, but I wouldn't recommend the 600. I think it's going to make it too stiff and load the tire too much and could possibly break traction on the tire. Frame bottoms out pretty hard with an 8-inch frame, right front frame height. Well, and that's a good point. I'm glad we brought up that frame bottoming out thing, because a lot of times people think that frame bottoming out is caused by the right front spring not being enough. Well, it actually could be caused about too much brake floater angle, could be caused about the pull bar not having enough pull bar shock to the pull bars actually shocking the car and unloading the car, driving that right front into the ground. What other things can you think of, Chad?
Direction of the pull bar pointed to the right front tire, same thing.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. Also the anti-dive also would be something to look at, but it's a touchy situation. Getting the right front balanced properly without having to do some weird crutch is key to rotation, in my opinion. That's the right front gets there first, and you got to make sure that's working good first.
Yeah, my experience is like if you go from a 550 and have to go to a 600 with the frame, especially with 8 inches of clearance, there's another issue that's causing the problem, and you're gonna bottom out that 600 probably as well as you would that 550. Justin is from Hypercoil. Awesome, Justin. I appreciate that. You all should have him on once a 1 week. That's a good idea. We'll have to do that. I never thought about that, but that's a great idea.
Yeah, Justin's a great guy. He's got a lot of knowledge. He works for Hypercoil, is one of the best springs in the industry. So if you are going to Super Nationals, he'll be there, and it's definitely worth your time to find him and pick his brain about different things.
Awesome. Drew, when putting lead so that makes sense why we'd have a long post from Justin. He's one of those smart guys.
He engineered it up there.
There we go. Yeah, all right. I was a little bit confused if I was going to be able to read all that stuff. I'm like, holy moly. Drew, when putting lead or trail in a stock, do you recommend doing it off the right rear or left rear? As you move the left rear back or move the right rear forward? What I've always been concerned about is the fact that 170 or that drive shaft measurement. I don't know if on a stock car, if you guys actually have, like on a modified, we've got a 72-inch measurement from the motor plate to the rear end, which regulates where the motor can actually be in these cars. And so when doing that, I've always felt that if you have to put lead in the car, I lengthen the right or the left rear. If we put trail in it, then I lengthen the right rear. So I'm always lengthening one side or the other, depending on whether I'm wanting to put trail in it. I can't say that there's a performance advantage or disadvantage either way, but with a stock car, I don't think you have those rules. So I don't know if I don't think there's going to be a performance edge however you do it. It's whatever going to be simplest. Okay. Aaron, good evening, guys. How light is it too light in a hobby stock for a right rear spring? Boy, I've heard some of them guys run 150s, and I've heard some of them guys run 250s. So it kind of, I don't know if I can help you there. I don't definitely myself. I would think with that weighted car, you get below 200 pounds, and I think the car would just lay on the right rear. With if you don't have enough spring, the car's just going to lay on the right rear, and that's going to hurt. Well, it's going to hurt traction off because the car is going to be laying over in the right rear, lifting the left front up, and all that good stuff, and not going to perform well. Josh, street stock running a pair of 1050 front springs and a 175 left rear and a 225 right rear with BHC shocks. Right rear seems to lose traction on slick. Any suggestion? I would actually contemplate moving some weight around. If the right rear's losing traction when it gets slick, that means that the racetrack's probably slowing down a little bit. So the G-forces rolling on the right rear aren't enough to the point where you might need to move some weight from the left side closer to the right side to help keep that tire stuck more. That would be my go-to. I play with a 25-pound chunk of weight a lot of times, and that makes a ton of difference. Brent, USRAB mod, having to wait on right front to dip going in. I have a 1/4-inch spacer and would like to go to a 1/2-inch spacer for wheel alignment, but that would make my problem worse, having a 3/8 shock and a 550 spring. Left rear chain is 4.5 inches. What would you recommend to get on the right front faster? Well, I'd probably put my left rear chain a bit more. I'd put more split in my left rear chain to try to get it on the right front more. I'd probably contemplate a 525-pound right front spring, something just a little bit softer. That would be my two thoughts. The other thing, though, when you've got a 1/4-inch spacer and you'd like to go to a 1/2-inch spacer, actually what that 1/2-inch spacer would actually do is help you, because that's going to lighten the actual wheel rate, because it's moving the wheel further away from the spring. So the actual wheel, the rate of the wheel in comparison to the spring would be softer. So it'll actually make the car feel like you softened up the right front spring. I would definitely go that way. I think you like the car better with that 1/2-inch spacer in there. I mean, it's only a 1/4 inch more, so it's not going to be night and day difference, but it's definitely going to help you. Ron, is running a short right front upper ball joint an advantage to a long one on a limited? Well, our cars with the Pinto spindles on it always use the standard ball joint in the right front and the +1/2 in the left front. But that's the way our roll center was built into those cars. So just telling you what would be the ideal thing for your upper ball joint might not be, I could answer your question and just give you that information, but there's a whole lot more that goes into that roll center and what's going on with that front end. But I would try it. I mean, all you're going to be is out the price of a ball joint, stud. It's going to move your roll center a little bit, so it definitely will change the car somewhat. Sean, running an IMCA sport mod, I do have a few degrees of pro dive in the right front. The pull bar is dead straight ahead static. Should I point it towards the left front? A small amount.
That was the guy with the guy with the
Yeah,
frame bottom and all. Yeah.
right,
So you can only manipulate that within an inch, right?
right.
Yeah. Yeah. So definitely moving the front to the left on D cell will take load off the right front.
Yeah, because when the car goes through its roll, that point moves to the right anyway. So if it's pointed to the right front, it's going to move further to the right when the car goes in under the throttle. If you start to the left, it'll move to the center, and that's kind of the way the GRT. That's the way our cars are. We actually point them to the left because when the car's in dynamic, we're straight ahead. Have you ever tried running a slider behind the rear end on a B mod? When I talked to GRT the other day, they told me to put the slider behind. Any thoughts? Well, if you put the slider behind, now I'm assuming that you're left rear. Yep, I've seen this question. The slider behind on the left rear, yeah, I definitely would. It's I like running the spring and slider behind on the left rear and in front on the right rear. On a B mod, I think that would definitely be an advantage. You're going to want to run a little stiffer compression shock with that setup by putting the shock in the front. But that combination, I think, would work very well. Wes, on a stock car, how are you guys getting the left front tire come forward so far? When it comes forward, does it create dive? I didn't know we were on the left front, getting the left rear tire to come forward. All right, that's the left front. What the hell? What it does, it definitely creates drive. And what happens is we're running more angle on the left trailing arm than we are on the right trailing arm. Like I said, probably, I know it's at least 20 degrees, it's somewhere between 20 and 25 degrees of angle statically. So that when you're all hiked up and in dynamic mode, it's probably got 35 degrees of angle in it, which drives that right or that left rear tire forward, which in turn puts more traction in it, puts more steer, so the car rotates better through the middle of the corner and just keeps driving the car all the way around. What's your recommendation for starting points for indexing angle at static and dynamic, both left rear and right side, IMCA modified? There you go, Chad.
So the right rear, we've been starting level at ride height, and the left rear, like, it varies chassis builder, 2 to 5 degrees into the spring. Some guys are kind of playing with that on your timing and your corner entry, putting more in to get it to rotate in on a shorter track and taking some away on a big fast track. So, but we still say the recommended starting positions are 0 on the right, and I just go with 3 on the left rear.
Would the right front bottoming out too hard cause the chassis from hiking on an IMCA stock car? 850 right front spring, 1100 left front spring, raise the ride heights. Well, it could, but man, I'd probably raise the ride heights a little bit in that situation, just because if you're bottoming out a stock car, would almost tell me that spring's a little soft. That right front spring's a little soft. But in answer to your question, I don't think it's going to keep the car from hiking. That's all has to do with your trailing arm angles and rear suspension more so than the front end. Ron says, thanks. The car's an IRP. Awesome. Well, Wehrs load stick. You check right front load with the car off the ground? Question mark.
Yeah. So, I mean, the best way that we've found to get the best data, most consistent, is to do it in the air. Take the tire and wheel off. Take that out of the equation. And I had a guy ask me the other day, why would you take the tire and wheel off? Well, because when you're in the pits working on the car, generally your tires and wheels are off. If you have a non-bead lock versus a bead lock, some different weight issues there. But the easiest way is just to get that out of the way. And once you have your car scaled and all ready to go, you'll have your ride heights, your static ride heights. So every corner is going to have a center to center on the shock where you would put the load stick in. So then you'd write that measurement down. You can hook it up on the ground, put the stick on the ground, take the shock off, put the stick on, then jack the car up in the air and take the tire and wheel off, and that'll give you your load, which is your baseline. And that's where you want to start. Either do it on the ground, pick it up with the stick on, and you zero the stick before you put it on, or put the stick on up in the air and then ratchet the stick to the center to center distance. Either way works. Just be consistent in what you do. And the reason that it doesn't work on the ground is because you have too many variables in the equation. If you have 10 gallons of gas versus 20 gallons of gas, there's variables that manipulate the load stick on the ground. However, it is good to take the car, put it on the ground, put the load stick on the right front, let's just say, and then pull the car into motion. That'll tell you instantly if you have something wrong in the back or shock mount bound up. The very first day we built that first load stick, we ran out to Steve that works here. We ran out and put it on his car. We were all excited. We had this ratcheting load stick, and so we went out and put it on his right front. And we pulled the car down into motion, and that thing was climbing and climbing, and got to 1,200, 1,300, 1,400, went to 5,000 off the charts. And the right front shock mount was bound up. So we found that bind in the suspension, and he fixed that. And the next week, he was very good with his increased travel on the right front. So that being able to manipulate the car and find binds is something that the Ultraforce engineers are working on, and we're actually coming out with something very soon that's very cool along that lines to help you find binds in your race cars. So stay tuned for that. That one's going to be pretty cool.
Awesome. Well, it sounds exciting, and it sounds like something we all need to stay tuned for. Well, we've got 10 minutes left here, so we've got time for a few other questions. Anything else that you wanted to talk about, Chad?
Pumped about Super Nationals. We got I see about 25 boxes of apparel, so we got our new apparel, and we got new product releases that we'll be doing every day down there. So just really looking forward to that week. It's definitely my favorite week. It's a grind, but we really look forward to getting to the racetrack and being with the customers and trying to help them win and trying to learn and make our products better. And that's where the ideas come from. And we generally leave Boone with a list of new product ideas. So it's always exciting to get to the track, and I get to hang out with you and Uncle Pat and Ben. So it's a fun week. Manufacturers Row has become a extended family for all of us manufacturers, I believe. Yeah. So it's just an exciting time.
We get to spend 8 days together.
Pumped.
Yeah.
We should be able to come up with something cool.
You would ought to think by the time we get out of there, we should definitely think of something. Limiter chain left rear location by center section or closer to the spring. Definitely by the center section. And I'll let Chad kind of explain why that is.
Yeah, so I mean, you got to think of the chain. I always go and reference my teeter-totter, but like where that location is of that chain influences that left rear tire. So if I'm picking up with the chain out here, I'm picking it up easier. If I'm picking up here, it doesn't pick it up as easy and it articulates more. So as that chain gets to the stopping location, it can rotate more. As the right rear goes up, it's going to actually get more travel distance after the chain gets tight when it's going through its motion. So you get more dynamic wedge number through the middle of the corner, so essentially more traction. However, some guys don't like how erratic it feels in the middle, so then they'll go back out towards the cage to just slow the motion and make it a little bit more stable. But again, that's kind of a driver preference thing. The one guy that just told me that he's going back out to the cage drives his car completely different than everybody else. So I'm still a fan of in tight to the bell just to get that extra, teeter-totter motion, to get that rear end. When the right rear gets to the max compression, the left rear is going to be a little bit farther down than if the chain is out towards the cage.
Yeah, most definitely. I like it in closer to the bell. I think it doesn't disrupt the left rear traction, and it restricts it, but it doesn't, I shouldn't say restrict it. It has some restriction to it, but it's not so severe as when you're out there closer to the tire. It's just my opinion. Right. Okay, Sean, would the left rear chain cause the car to be tight? Hang on a second.
Oh, you meant right rear.
Okay, so would the right rear chain being too tight cause the car to be tighter? Yeah, definitely would. If you have the right rear chain too tight, it's definitely going to cause the car to be tight. What it's going to do is restrict it from gaining an angle on that right rear trailing arm, which is going to restrict steer and that type of stuff. You can maybe explain it more than I can, Chad.
Yeah, so the right rear chain, the tighter you tighten that up, the more grip you're going to have, obviously. But when you get into a rough situation, it's not going to be drivable. So you really got to be careful tuning the right rear chain because it can be a problem. We've been doing some open stuff with biscuits there and softening that load so that when you do hit the right rear chain, it's not so violent if you get onto a rough track situation. But like an IMCA car can't run any bushings or any softening devices in their chain. So you need to be really careful on cars where you can't run any cushion on how tight you manipulate that and how much you tighten that chain up on the right rear.
Yeah, and I actually set my right rear chain to the point where my right rear spring is just touching. It has maybe 10 pounds of load on it. IMCA stock car. What's your recommendation for how much bite in the scale number, minimum to maximum? My recommendation is probably that 150 mark. That seems to be a pretty decent mark. I don't know, anywhere from 125 to 150 seems to be a pretty good mark. I don't know. If you get over 150, it seems like the cars get a little too free getting in, and especially when the racetrack gets drier, they lose side bite easily because you got so much left rear bite that the car doesn't get on the right rear as well. So I kind of stay right in that 125 to 150 range. Jeffrey, so how do you load the light spring? Basically, what I actually do is set the car up, scale it, and then depends on how much you need to, but put half inch of load so that there's load in that spring. But that's where you got to go softer. I think that 175 is probably still not soft enough to do that light spring preload thing. I think you might need to be in that 150 range where you can preload that spring at least an inch. So if the chain mount is by the bell, you probably should set the chain drop at dynamic?
Well, the chain references are always going to be at dynamic numbers, and I don't know how many times you've heard it, Bob, but we hear a lot of times like, "Oh, I went out on the racetrack and I over-indexed my cage." Well, that's because you obviously the suspension is going to travel more when you're in dynamic on the racetrack. So you always got to look at things in the shop, like you say, when you set that chain dynamically, and then when you're up on stands, you need to be putting the right rear up in the wheel well to your max travel of your right rear to look at that left rear, how much farther it's going. So definitely you always got to pay attention to your dynamic travels and making sure that everything is going to go through without topping a shock out or something like that, or over indexing the cage or over indexing the brake floater. So definitely need to keep an eye on that stuff, and you're always looking at the dynamic.
Okay, Alex, 2017 GRT B mod. When loading a right rear spring on a slider, 225 on spring, how much load are you actually looking for? And is there a center to center measurement or right height number that you use for the right rear? We use that 12 and 7/8 right rear measurement from the bottom of the frame to the top of the axle housing. And then, depending on the chain, we actually don't load that right rear spring. We on our B mod, we set that spring, like I said, I set the chain so that spring is just barely loaded, like 10 pounds when it's off the spring. But as far as putting any additional load on that slider, we do not put any additional load. And I don't have a center to center measurement to actually help you with that. Couldn't tell you that. I just know that right height number on that right rear is 12 and 7/8. All right, well, this was a good night tonight. Lots of great questions, great input. Appreciate all the comments and everybody adding to it. We had a great night. Some suggestions on getting some people to come on board with us on one of these shows, which is a great idea because I'm always thinking about that. And so we're, like I said, now our next mission is Super Nationals. So our next show is going to actually be the 11th, which will give you the Super Nationals preview or post-race. We'll be able to tell you what all we did in 8 days next Monday, or two Mondays from now. So anyway, so thanks for watching, guys. We sure appreciate it, and we had fun, and look forward to helping you. I hope we help you guys out tonight.
Thanks, everybody.